Ivan Mike 1968 has been putting out maybe an accidental series on related topics all connected to probability, dice probabilities. And it's a fantastic example. I'm really glad that he and the other participants within the brigade Facebook community, have been taking the time just to talk to each other. Not close each other out, but try to explain how their use of language is intended. Because multiple people are talking around the same event and not understanding each other until they sit down and share their points of view. So it's been wonderful to watch. I've completely stayed out of it just to see what would happen. And it's been great. Lots of people bringing their particular specialties and interests out into the open, explaining how they perceive of the dice roll, which is really important from both the game master and player perspective. What does the die roll really mean to you? The people who are mathematically inclined and have been through work experience or training that involved handling statistics and probabilities as a matter of course, and being able to look at the die roll that's coming and gauge how likely it is to succeed and base their actions on that kind of intuitive understanding, or not intuitive, their skill-based understanding of how likely a certain result is. It's been very cool. I've had the pleasure over the many years of my gaming to play with different types of people. People for whom math is a complete stranger. People for whom math is more comfortable than actually talking. People who look at the dice completely differently. And so this particular series of exchanges back and forth on probability has been very satisfying for me to watch. But now it's moving into the realm of how to apply all of this to your game, or how the particular game you're playing will affect all of this. And this brings us to things like style points in Ubiquity, to edge in Shadowrun and Mechwarrior, A Time of War, to fate points, fudge points, and this sort of thing. How do mechanics which affect the actual implementation of the die roll, how do they inform how we view probability, how we view the roll itself, the setup of the roll, the frame of the roll, and the ultimate narration of that roll's resolution? And with that change of direction, I think maybe it's possible for me to get involved in the conversation. Maybe I'll have something to contribute. So there were many different types of what could be lumped all together under the the heading of narrative mechanics discussed, or randomly referenced during the course of these exchanges. Things like style points in Ubiquity, things like the Destiny pool in Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars, things like fate points, what have you. So these mechanics, while they occupy a similar place in a game, they affect die rolls, they affect resolutions, they affect scenes. They aren't the same. They aren't handled the same way, and so the implementation of them puts the game master in a different headspace, a different position within the scene. Now, I'm only going to talk about these rules as they are written. It would be impossible to discuss the different permutations of how they might be applied, or different ways they might be interpreted. Right? So when I say things like, you can't use the mechanic this way, let's agree to understand that what I mean by that is according to the mechanic as written. Right? We can have separate conversation about different ways to apply it, and that will be fun too. But just to get the information out there, let's stick to the rules as written in our understanding of what I'm about to say. So one of the examples was about style. Let's start with style. The particular use of style that I like to look at is where we increase the die pool for accomplishing a skill. And let's say this is one of those do or die things. It's a desperate leap. You have to choose to jump or not to jump. And if you decide that the character will jump, then you also have to deal with the worry of maybe not being successful. The number of successes that you need to accomplish that jump safely are outside of the normal limit of what you can produce. So this leads you to the idea of perhaps I should spend style. Now I like this mechanic quite a bit because it affects both the character and the player. Some mechanics like this are purely about the player using a resource to change how the game works and don't connect as readily to the character's point of view. Style is one that translates very easily into the character's headspace because it sort of mirrors the player's headspace. I need to try harder. I don't normally have the capacity to do what's expected of me right now, so I really have to exert. I have to dig down and make sure I can do this thing. So we're picturing something like, dangling beneath a dirigible on a rope, and the dirigible is pulling away, it's on fire, and sudden death is imminent. We really need to make a leap to the landing tower, which is, it looks too far. Can I do it? Can I not do it? If I stay, maybe the dirigible will, as it burns, will get close enough to the ground that I can drop safely. But right now, if I drop, I'm dead. It's this kind of situation. I could climb up to the dirigible. All these choices. You make the decision to jump, and now you have to make a decision to spend style or not. And as written, if you don't spend style, you're not going to be able to spend them later to fix it. And also from the perspective of the character, you've thrown yourself out into space trying to grab onto this structure that's just out of reach. Once you're in the air, you can't suddenly decide to try harder. Right? You're either going to succeed or you're going to fail. You're not going to sprout wings suddenly and glide. It's that sort of thing. And this informs play. Choosing to use style or choosing to not use style. And what's fun about Ubiquity is that it's pretty easy for any player to assess whether or not they can do it. They've got the concept of the average. They know what their die pool is. They know that half of that value is the number of successes they will probably generate. So if the number of successes required are more than that, they need to think about exerting themselves, and that translates into spending style. If it's less, they need to think, well, this is something that I would expect to be able to do. And if they fail, they can use their style points to try and mitigate the damage in some way. But that's a separate use of style. Not all games work like this. In Mechwarrior, the 4th edition, A Time of War, Edge is both a before and after mechanic. You can choose to spend it before, or if you fail, you can choose to spend it after. You can't do both. But if you choose to invest edge before the roll, it has a larger effect on what you've done. If you reserve edge, because it's very, very difficult to replace, it's not as easily earned as something like style. If you choose to hang on to it, as many people will, if you use it to fix something, it has a much smaller effect on the roll. This is kind of interesting. So now we have two concepts in play. One is timing. When do I use this resource? With style, it's before. You build the pool, then you roll it. You can't fix the pool after. With edge, you're making a decision. Do I spend it before, or do I wait, conserve the resource, and use it after? And what is connected to that is, how easily can I replace this resource? With style, if you're the kind of player who enjoys playing the character that they have, you're going to be earning style fairly regularly. And if you have a good, fun group, the style chips will be flowing back and forth. It'll be awesome. You're not very worried about replacing style. You might be worried about having enough style at the right time. But with edge, however, running out of it is a serious consideration. It's much harder to replace than the frequency with which you will want to spend it. When do I use it? Before or after? And so this mechanic gets deliciously detailed. Right? If I choose to spend edge before the roll, I will get double the number of points I invest as a modifier to my roll. So in other words, if I spend 1 point of edge, I'll get a +2 to my roll. Now here's the risk. I might succeed anyway. But by spending that edge, I will increase my margin of success. And then here's another kicker. Let's make it even sweeter. I can either spend it to improve my roll, or I can spend it to make the opponent's roll harder, increasing their degree of failure. Interesting tactical choice. And of course, for the mathematically inclined, that will be something that they would enjoy figuring out. And for those who aren't mathematically inclined, they can at least look at it and say, what's the primary operation here? Do I need to do better, or do I hope that he's going to do worse? That's all before the roll. So I'm able to spend multiple points of edge. I'm able to give myself a significant bonus or give my opponent a significant penalty. But once I've used it, it's gone, and I'm probably not going to see that point again in this session or the next session, maybe a few sessions. It may take me a while to get that point back. It's a precious resource with a big effect. Edge is sort of an unusual mechanic, which is why I bring it up here, in that it occupies many different types of implementation. See, I can use it before the roll to increase my chance of success. This mirrors the use of style, right? I'm going to exert myself in order to have a better effect, or at least try harder to succeed. That's how we can turn the analog of rolling the dice and spending the edge into the character experience. What's going through the character's head in this moment when the player is spending edge? What's happening to the character? The character is trying harder. They want to succeed. But what if I use it before the roll to make the opponent's situation harder? What does that represent? Does that represent something in my character's head? Maybe some people out there could figure out a way that works, but I think maybe the default would be to narrate something about the scene, or to focus in some way on the situation between the characters. What is intimidating or causing the other person to hold back, causing the other person to hesitate, that kind of stuff. Either the character is doing something to undermine the confidence of the opponent, or the situation has changed in some way that the opponent is negatively affected, whereas you are left unaffected. Your chance to succeed, your personal chance to succeed in this opposed roll, is not improved, and your situation isn't worsened, just theirs. This is a more narrative headspace rather than an in-character headspace. It's more about the player and less about the character. Although you could push it toward the character in specific scenes and situations, I won't deny that, but you see what I'm going for. So before the roll, this can be trying harder, like style, or it can be revising the scene. But let's say I choose not to roll it before the roll, and then things go awry. Well, I can still spend it. I can now spend it, but will have a lesser effect. Or I can spend it for a reroll. Now I'm just canceling what happened with this resolution and replacing it with another resolution. This is very powerful. It's also a big gamble, a risk. I could roll even worse this second time. So here's the kicker. I can spend it on my roll, or I can spend it on the opponent's roll. They could conversely roll even better than they did. But I've chosen to reserve or conserve that resource until I know I absolutely need it, and so the payoff is not something I can control with as great a degree as the before the roll option. So if I'm willing to take that risk, I'm going to get a big payoff. That encourages that risk taking. And when that risk, that investment of points, comes before the roll, it also involves the character. When it occurs after the roll, you are revising, you are editing, you are fixing what has happened so that it fits what you want to happen. And that involves much more of the player. It may involve only the player, depending on the type of role. So, two similar mechanics, two similar modes of implementation, one of them offering more options, and those options have distinct differences on play when they come before or after the roll. In Mythras, by the design mechanism, which used to be called RuneQuest 6th edition, there is a trait called Luck. And this is a resource. It's purely a player resource. It's used after a roll, and it's used to get a reroll. Right? You've tried something, and the character has failed. Now, this is very explicitly a system where every roll is a distinct action. It's a punch, or a sword slash, or it's a swing across a gorge, or it's a movement of a defined amount of distance. It's blow by blow, these rolls. And so luck is an edit. That's all it is. It's not the player trying harder, or the character trying harder. It's a player decision like, whoa, I failed. And this doesn't match this character. This character is luckier than that. But luck is a resource that you use up. Now, it refreshes every session. So the player is not going to be earning luck in play. The character has a certain amount of luck. And if they push their luck, eventually it will run out. So this informs play of the character in terms of who they are, how they see themselves compared to other warriors or creatures out there in the wilderness. It has a real effect on play in a very broad sense, an ongoing sense throughout the play of that character. But in the moment where you've rolled and you failed, you're now deciding as the player, am I going to accept the consequences of that failure, or am I going to edit them out of existence? So, another completely different effect. And this mechanic doesn't burden the player with the idea of how can I replace the luck. It's not like edge, like, wow, it's going to take me a long time to earn that edge back. It's not like style, where I know that even though I've exhausted my style resources right now, I will soon get them back just by doing something that fits the particular idiom of my character. No, it's out of your hands. It's luck. It's the involvement of fate and of the forces that are interested in your character, namely the player. So, a very different effect on play, and something very distinct about luck as opposed to edge or style or whatever, fudge, fate points. This is something that's inherent to the character. Now, edge is kind of similar in that this is an attribute that you buy when you build the character, and you choose when to spend it. But the Game Master is involved in how that pool is replaced. But luck, when you create the character, it's a derived trait from your characteristics, from your attributes. So this is something that is inherently, inextricably involved with who that character is. Some characters are luckier than others by virtue of who they are. The Game Master is not involved in determining luck. The Game Master is not involved in replacing luck. It refreshes every session. So, when we think about using this resource, it's tied very tightly to the identity of the character. It does have this connection to the character. Whereas in a game system where this is a resource assigned by the Game Master for gameplay reasons, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the character at all. It becomes easier to tie that concept to the player. And this brings us around to Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars with its Destiny Pool, another very different mechanic. Before we get there, let's go back and tie in the earlier examples to set us up for this one. So style, as we discussed, can be spent to improve your chances. But style can also be used to improve another character's chances. You can spend your style points to improve someone else's situation. All it costs is a narration of how that's possible. If you can't figure out a way to narrate how that's possible, then it's not possible. So that's kind of interesting. Your style points that you've earned by being you can allow you to assist another character. Edge in A Time of War, however, is used only on your character, even if you're spending it to decrease the opponent's chance to affect you. You're spending it on your character's experience of that moment, either to improve your own chances or to worsen the opponent's. Luck is a mechanic that's only spent on your character. So now, the Destiny Pool. With a name like that, it's kind of interesting. What does the Destiny Pool allow? Now, the Destiny Pool basically allows you to alter the dice pool. And unlike the previous ones where you could fool around with them and maybe allow the expenditure of style points after, oh, you failed by one success. If you give me 2 style points, you can have that success. A group could arrange for that to happen. It would mirror the use of luck in Mythras. Right? No problem. But in Star Wars, how the pool is set up, Destiny has to be spent prior to the roll. There's no way to fix it after without a complete reroll. So you could allow Destiny, I suppose, to buy a reroll. But let's focus on the effect of Destiny. If you spend a point of Destiny, you can upgrade your chances, or you can downgrade the opponent's chances. This sounds very much like Edge from A Time of War. So this is kind of cool. But what does that represent? Well, going by the name of the Destiny Pool, this represents the effects of fate, like luck in Mythras. It doesn't necessarily need to be tied to who your character is. It can be tied more to where your character is in the grand sweep of history, or who your character is. The force runs strong in your family, this sort of thing. This can tie you into a lot more than just who your character is or what your character is thinking at the moment. They can be tied into things like the pull or push of fate, the destiny of millions, the ongoing war between followers of ancient religions based around the Force. It's a simple mechanic. You can either improve your chances or worsen the opponent's chances, or increase the difficulty or decrease the difficulty, whatever. And that's what it does. But everything about this die pool is based on narrating the results. So if you have dipped into the pool of destiny, what does that really reflect? How does that help you tie into the sort of kind of grand, semi-mythologized stories that kind of capture us about Star Wars? So, where does this leave us? This leaves us with a series of examples that I hope I have made clear to people who are not familiar with those particular games. If not, hit me up in the comments and we'll try and sort that out. But we have mechanics that, by their nature, being mechanics, are tied to our game-playing sides. And we have mechanics which, by their nature, influence how we are describing, how we are narrating what happens at the table. And we have mechanics which, by their nature, can inform us of things going on in the character's head, and therefore connecting with our simulationist side. And we all have these impulses, some to greater degree than others, kind of like a 3-band equalizer on an old music player. But how we choose to implement them will change the settings on that equalizer, sometimes fairly dramatically. If you take a mechanic that's intended for use before the roll and shift it to after, what effect will that have on the players around the table and how they are perceiving what's going on and when they are perceiving it? If this turns it into an edit of the scene, right, this takes them out of character and puts them into the role of player, having an authorial stance over the fiction of what is being created as a story. This separates you from whatever emergent property there is about the story, so that you're no longer discovering, you're deciding. Right? Now, you might be able to twist it and use this as a way to explore the character narratively. Right? Why is it that this reworking of what was intended to happen, that failure, is going on? But again, this is happening up here. It's a decision about what the character feels rather than a reaction, right? As you're viewing what is affecting the character. It may seem like a very refined stance to take, but I offer it as something to consider. Any mechanic that's very complicated and detailed is also going to have that same effect. When you're faced with a decision of, do I spend it before or after, and do I spend it to affect me or the other guy, that, of course, is taking you out of the moment and making you consider things as a player. What's best for me as the player, and how can I improve the chances of the character? The character is almost an afterthought in that process. You have something like luck. You can't spend it before because you haven't failed yet. You don't have the power to edit before you need the power to edit. So again, this is something that's occurring up here, but it's there to reinforce who the character is, and I find that really interesting. And then finally we have the destiny pool, which is set up to mirror these hidden and invisible forces which are shaping the destinies of untold millions in that galaxy far, far away. And yet it's connected to a player choice. The player decides when they will spend them. And the players as a group around the table are looking at that resource. They have a finite resource, and they're kind of communicating with each other about how they will assist each other and whether or not they should spend destiny and what that all means. So there are many, many ways that these mechanics can affect and inform play. And there's many ways to implement them or change the implementations of them. And all of these decisions have consequences, some good and some bad. And of course, what's good in my group might be bad in yours. So just simply being aware of these things, I feel, is very valuable. And the more examples of these things as they exist and as they are used, I think will be nothing but helpful. So thanks a lot for getting involved in this conversation about probabilities and statistics and turning it into something in which I could share a little bit for 25 minutes or whatever. Thanks for watching.